Welcome back to another episode of Dynasty Theory. We received a question from one of our patrons, and essentially it was, if you had to sum up your dynasty strategy, what would it be? If you had to put all of your thoughts and all of your overall values when you play in one place, what would that look like? So Mitch, I initially had everything in one sheet.
Mhm.
I was like, let's talk about all of this. And you thought it was a good idea, and I agreed to start from the beginning.
Mhm.
Take it piece by piece. So this is going to be a strategy series. If you were part of the Dynasty Theory Patreon, you are getting early access to each and every one of these episodes. If you're not, come check it out. $5 a month. First week is free. If you don't like it, bounce. If you enjoy this type of content, like, subscribe, comment, do all that good stuff. If you don't like it, let us know. We'd like to hear that too. So, Mitch, startup strategies.
Mhm.
And despite you not wanting to, I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about settings.
No, I didn't say we're not going to talk about settings. I said just not the first thing talk about settings. But one
You
thing I
attacked
really
me.
want to
You attacked me a little bit.
sure. But what I really want to get across to very begin with is there's multiple different strategies that work in Dynasty overall. There's multiple different strategies that work in startups overall. But the main takeaway I hope that everyone can get away here is you can definitely put yourself in better position to win your league following a proper strategy in a startup, but you could absolutely kill your team not doing the correct moves in a dynasty startup, which is very drastically different than a normal redraft or best ball startup. Yeah, you could draft bad, but you probably have ways to move around. If you trade all of your future picks, you draft a whole bunch of old players, within 2 years, that team is dead. I don't care what you do, that team is dead. So I think there's some different strategies that we could talk about here to make sure everyone just, if especially if you're new, you get the right foot forward going into these kind of leagues.
I would say for the most part, and you made a good point, like, there are so many different ways to be successful in Dynasty. And we
Mhm.
see that from everybody in our Discord. We see that from other content creators. We see it from ourselves because, like, you look at your portfolio and you have teams built one way and they can be successful. You have teams built another way, they can be successful. And it's not to say there aren't many ways to ruin your Dynasty team, because we've seen that as well.
Yes.
But you can certainly put yourself ahead. And then I would say a majority of the dynasty managers, they fall into that middle ground.
Mhm.
A lot of managers just kind of exist, right? And we see that this time of year. We had a comment in the Discord the other day. It was like, "Hey, this is my first dynasty off season. Is it always this dead this time of year?" It has been awful. I'm going through trade baits and I'm trying to throw
Mhm.
offers out there, and there are leagues, I'm looking back, there hasn't been a trade in 2 months
Yeah, since the
since the
rookie
rookie
draft happened.
draft.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Everybody crawls into their hole. And then, what's very aggravating for me, tangent here, this has nothing to do with startup, but I'm going through, if Mitch, you have guys on your trade bait and I'm sending you offers and I'm not even getting a response, or it's just a quick rejection. Like, I hate to say go have that conversation with the manager, but try to see maybe, hey, what are you looking for then? Not like put the trade together,
mhm.
but are you looking for win now pieces? Are you looking for future prospects, picks? Because there's something to be done here. But if you're putting a Cooper Cup on the block and I'm not getting a response, hint, hint, wink, wink, this is a real life situation. Come on.
Dude, it's so funny you say that because we have a big Discord league, 24 teams. It's a duplicate league, so there's 2 copies. I hadn't looked at my trade bait in a while, and all of a sudden I get an offer for Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? I'm like, you guys know that you're going to have to vastly overpay, so don't even bother, right? And the manager came back. He said, well, you have him on your trade bait. I'm like, oh, my bad. So I went and I fixed that. I took him off immediately. I did keep uh some terrible Diami Brown. Yeah, I kept him on there just to make sure everyone knew that he was available in the league. But yeah, stuff happens.
And I do think some of it is being outdated, right?
Yes.
So I think that has to come into it. Okay. But we do want to talk about dynasty startups right now and overall strategies. And I'm going to include some discussion on league settings.
Mhm.
And I agree. Nobody wants to hear an episode about league setting. Like, hey, this is what to do in a 10-team league. Like I get it, Mitch. I get it. But it is imperative and it is important to talk about. But you're in a startup league.
Mhm.
Let's put league settings away for a minute, even though it's absolutely critical. I'm just laughing at Mitch's face.
Yeah.
You're like, shut up about the settings. Shut up about the settings. So we're in the startup draft, Mitch. You get your draft order. Like I said, we're talking about dynasty strategies. We're back at the beginning. What's going on in your head at this point?
So I think even more important than the settings is knowing who you're drafting with. So there's a lot of leagues to where if this is just, hey, you're looking for a dynasty startup, you see one on Reddit, you see one on some Facebook group, you see whatever, you're probably going to have a decent idea that a lot of the members in that league are going to be random dynasty managers, right? But then you have other leagues to where if you're looking at from like our Discord or from a different Discord in the fantasy football sphere, it's those could be like a little bit more veteran kind of startups. And if you do that, there are vastly different strategies you have to use. If I'm in a random startup, I'm willing to go older vets for the reason of, hey, first off, I don't know how long this league is going to last. And second off, I guarantee you I could probably draft better than they can. So I'm just going to get the best players that I can and not worry about moving around in the draft so much. Against more veteran kind of players, I'm looking for every edge I could get. That's when I adopt John's strategy of trying to trade back as much as I possibly can because I need more ammunition in those kind of leagues. I need just that 1-2% difference. But in random leagues with a lot of new managers, it's a little bit more open to do what you need to do.
Are you finding it more difficult? In which situation do you find it more difficult? The first situation where you're in, a random league with people that you don't know, or a league where everybody, we're in 5, 6, 7, 8 leagues with each other, and it's just, hey, we have a startup going on where everybody is more familiar with maybe your approach and your values, and hey, I'm not going to let Mitch pull a fast one on me. So which one do you find it a little bit easier to, one, navigate through the draft from a player perspective? Like, okay, I think I can get my guys in one of these two leagues, or it's easier for you to trade around?
I think it's twofold. I think it works in both ways, right? In the random league, it's definitely probably easier to trade around because everyone doesn't know your specific values. But there is a far greater chance those leagues for you to see those lopsided deals and for one team to all of a sudden move really far past the rest of the teams in the league because they got that, hey, someone traded the 104, but that other team got the 205, 406. It just goes down the list. They got a future pick off of it. And it's like, when that happens, it's like, it changes the dynamic of a league. But in more leagues to where people a lot more, it's very rare to see those kind of startup deals getting done. I think everyone starts on a more level footing, but it makes the league a lot more competitive and they last a lot longer. So, it's the two-edged sword there.
I want to make a point to the listeners.
It's double-edged sword, right? Not two-edged sword. I get corrected a lot on my, analogies, whatever they are. Yeah, we'll leave it to the Discord to tell me what I did wrong there.
I was going to say, I was going to let that slide, but I'm sure we got some of our folks in there that's going to say, Mitch, hey, double-edged sword. You made a really good point. I want to drive it home before we move on. If you're in a league with people you don't know and you're not sure, it's like, especially if it's from, there are Facebook groups that people have jumped into leagues. And they put teams together and we're like, how the hell did you put that team together? If it's kind of a questionable foundation for the league in terms of league mates,
Mhm.
I think being first to market is so important. Whether it is I'm moving my future picks, I'm trying to acquire future picks, I'm trying to move up, I'm trying to move back, because that kind of sets the price. I can't tell you how many times we've seen either personally firsthand or from members of the Discord and the Patreon that they'll be like, I just saw a startup fourth get traded for a future first.
Yeah.
Like, so I do think it's very critical to be first to market. Is it always possible? No. Like, let's say you are the back end of the first in your startup. You pull the 112 and then the 201. Obviously, a move that somebody's able to get for their 101 or 102, you just can't possibly do that.
Mhm.
So yes, there are some issues and some disadvantages and or advantages, but I do think trying to be active, trying to be more active in leagues where you aren't familiar with the managers is a really good point, and something that I think a lot of people, ourselves included, need to do and pay attention to. You mentioned something, going into it, you just get your startup order, and knowing who you're drafting with, you said, is important. How do you go about, like, if you see early trade activity is lacking, 101's on the block, nothing, 102, 103, 104. Like, we get through middle of the second, let's say, in a typical 12-team super flex tight end premium startup draft. You get through the middle of the second, every pick's been on the block, no pick has been moved. How does that impact your dynasty strategy off the bat compared to a league where there is a lot of trade activity?
The one with a lot of trade activity, I think, is the easier league, right? Because you're going to be able to find your places to move up and hopefully to move back if possible. I had a startup this year too. There wasn't a single trade done in the startup draft. There wasn't one. When that happens, I think it makes the league a little bit less fun when that sort of stuff happens, but everyone did it because everyone knew each other and everyone just kind of wanted to draft. It was I've only done maybe 3 startups so far this year. I haven't done a lot. So everyone just kind of wanted to get in, get it done, see the values and go from there on it. But those leagues are tough. One thing that I will do in every single league though is in the second round, I will try to move my first round pick for anybody's fifth. And their startup fifth round pick, right? My future first for their fifth round startup pick. And I send it to every single person in the league. And then when that doesn't happen, I wait. And if nothing happens there, everything's dust. I don't see any trade offers coming back to me. That's when I go in and I try to get their firsts, right? And if that doesn't happen, then it moves into I know what this league's going to be, right? If you've sent that offer out to 11 other league mates, they're not trading back with you, and then you go the other way with it, and you try to get theirs, they're still not trading with you, then all of a sudden you just kind of know, all right, there's not much to move here.
And this kind of, everything's intertwined. Mm-hmm. That kind of goes back to being the first to market that we talked about.
Without a doubt.
You laid the groundwork. Hey, my first is on the block. It's available for any fifth.
Mm-hmm.
At least if you get rejected across the board, 99% of the time, no other manager was going to get that done.
Yes, exactly.
And then sometimes you get one of those random ones that you do see it get done, and you're like, wait a minute.
That's not fair.
Well, everybody just assumes Mitch's first is going to be the 112 next year.
That's fair. Yeah.
So that's
at least the 111. I mean, I don't want to sound too overconfident.
Right. You might get some variance there where you lose in the championship game. So we talk about the early trade activity, leagues that you find it a little bit easier. I absolutely prefer leagues where there is just a ton of trade activity. Mm-hmm. And that even like I shared a startup draft in the Patreon that we did from 2021, holy cow, it was so rough. The team I drafted in the startup,
Yeah.
and at least I know the league is active that I'm able to, you know, remedy that,
Mhm.
you know? So I think the leagues that are the most challenging are where there's no trade activity. Whoever you draft, you have. You might get a few random trades here and there over the next year or two, but it's going to be few and far between. And within this strategy series, next week, I think we're going to talk about the startup's done. You're in your first off season, like post startup, but before the first season takes place. And then the week after, we'll talk about if you're in an existing league, because there's certainly things where you have a startup, you have post startup, you have existing league, where a lot of the overall overarching strategies they carry forward, but obviously some things are going to be specific to one or the other. And I think they're all equally important and important to discuss here. But the early trade activity, now, does that impact your strategy at all? Like from a roster construction standpoint, there's no trade activity. You make your first, you make your second, you make your third. Does it impact the way you're looking at the quarterback position? Does it impact the way maybe you're attacking running back? Do you completely fade or do you jump them up? How does it change for you? Because for me, there is a little bit of a change.
Yeah, I swear I'm the only person who, talks on a Dynasty podcast YouTube video that is willing to admit I care about my starting lineup. I don't care if I'm drafting in March. But if
Get the pitchforks, get them.
I know, right? But if it's a dead league in a March startup, it's probably going to be pretty quiet until the time the season starts. That's just how this is going to go. And so I care about my starting lineup. I'm looking by the 10th round, okay, like where am I lacking? Where do I need to go for depth? I'm not looking like, oh, hey, this is a really good value here. I'm looking at I'm probably not going to get any trades done. And I need to make sure, if I'm trying to be competitive, of course, if I'm trying to compete in this league, I'm like, okay, this is who I need to go after. Oh, look, DeAndre Hopkins is there in the 11th. Would I take him in a lot of leagues? Probably not. Am I going to take him to a league to where I'm trying to compete and there's nobody else trading with me? Then yeah, that's what I'm going to do. But that's everything that happens in a draft should change your strategy a little bit. You can't go into a draft be like, okay, this is what I'm doing. I am trading up for 2 top 6 quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what if that last 6th guy is going to cost you 3 startup picks and your future first of next year? You probably shouldn't make the trade. So going in there and being like, hey, this is how you win at Dynasty. This is how you have to do. If you could play that way if you want, but Dynasty's fun for me, right? I want to play and have fun. I don't want to just be set in this singular mindset of like, hey, this is how you have to win.
Very robotic, and I kind of walk that line. You know, there's things I look at and talk about, and you see this in our co-manager leagues that you and I are in together. And I'll be like, "Hey, Mitch, like, what do you think about this?" And you're like, "Absolutely not." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I kind of liked it, but okay." Or vice versa. Like, we'll get a trade offer, and you're like, "Oh, should I accept this?" And I'm like, "Absolutely not."
You're like, no, I hate it.
Well, let me plug this into my computer over here.
That's fair.
Like, but that I definitely get that. Like, you know, there are people in our Discord and they rip on me, and I love it. They're like, JB, like, if you were going on vibes for this answer, what would it be? Like, I'm talking to you, Simey. I'm talking to you. I don't do that.
Right.
Like, you can look at me. I'm not a great go with the flow kind of guy. I like to plan. That's what I do. I like structure. I can admit that. Do I have a few idiosyncrasies? Of course. But you look at this and it's like there certainly is that balance between structure and completely number based, and this is my strategy, and go with the flow vibes. And I think you can be successful either way. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And we see that from top to bottom with a lot of managers. Like, some folks are very successful. Just, hey, I think this guy's gonna have a great season. And then it's like, okay, well, what do you think? if you had to split up, what's the positional target share? What's his target share? It's like, JB, I think he's going to have a good season. They have a new coach.
I watched an Instagram video and Austin Eckler was running on a treadmill and like he looked like he could run. Fantastic shape. I get it.
All right. So we talk about strategies changing from draft to draft. And you could say zag when people zig or zig when people zag. But the league settings, this is where league settings come in, I think.
Yes.
It's critical because like this could be an entire episode, just league settings. And I wanted it to be an entire episode. And I was told no.
You want at least
by
the first 30 minutes of this episode.
By the powers that be within the Dynasty Theory LLC here. I was told no. I was told, JB, we're not doing that. But league settings, how is that going to dictate things for you? Like just very quickly, let's say 12-team, super flex, 2 PPR for tight end, start 10. Ideally, how are you approaching it? I'm putting you on the spot here. This isn't in the notes.
So there's multiple ways to attack it, right? I will always believe the best way to build in Dynasty is to build around 2 very good quarterbacks. But the rest of the community has caught on to that in the last 3 to 4 years. So that's not... Is it the best strategy? Yes. Are you going to get it done in 80% of startups? Probably not, because everyone wants those quarterbacks now. So then it turns into, what is the next premium piece in that league? It's a tight end. Go and try to trade for Sam Laporta or Trey McBride in a tight end heavy premium league. You just can't do it because it's like, okay, you're going to give me close to Jalen Hurts value for him. And no one really wants to do that, but that's the price of them. But I really think when it comes to settings, here's the fastest way that I do it for any league. Before I go into scoring settings or anything, I look at the amount of players, the amount of teams. I times it by the amount of the starting lineup. So let's say it's a 12-team league. There are 10 players in the starting lineup, 120 players. But I already play in a lot of 14-team leagues, and I know how depth can be an issue there, right? But I know 14 times that same 10 is 140. So 140 is kind of that point to where depth starts being an issue. So that's really the basics that I do. If I'm like, hey, it's a 10-team league, but you start 12. Well, it's a 12-team league. Play it the exact same. So I think just doing a really quick, the amount of teams times the starting lineup, see how many players are actually having me started each week. That's going to give you a great idea if you could go really start heavy, try to trade for, if it's a start 9 league and it's a 10-team league, I don't care about probably 40% of the players in the NFL because they just are never going to hit my starting lineup. But if it's a 14-team league, start 12, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, I can never trade up in this league because I can't give up 2 starting players for 1. And I don't care who that other player is because I'm going to have a hole in my lineup the whole time.
Essentially, what you just summarized without any numbers is the way I view warp.
Yes.
So like ultimately, and this is an inside kind of an ongoing joke. We've talked about it on the podcast. We talk about it in the Patreon. Somebody mentioned warp yesterday and said before they said it, they said, Mitch, earmuffs. Like that. That's essentially what we're talking about here, and the way at least I utilize it.
Yes.
Like you're looking at your league, how much value over replacement are the studs getting? Is it minimized or is it increased? When I look at it, my baseline is the setting we just talked about. 12-team superflex, start 10, 2 PPR for tight end. And I go over to dynastydaddy.com and I look at what the warp is in that league on a per game basis overall. So that's my baseline. And then utilizing the Dynasty Theory tiers, they are available on the Dynasty Theory Patreon, $5 a month. Again, the first 7 days completely free. Check it out. If you don't like it, bounce. That's fine. Then I go over to dynastydaddy.com, log in through Patreon, and my tiers, you go into your league settings, and you can see with my values where the warp within your league compares to the warp on the baseline. How is it impacted? Is there a smaller gap between a quarterback 1 and a quarterback 2, for example? Is there a larger gap between a running back 3 and a lower end flex? Usually that's not the case. But what Mitch just talked about, do I need to go beyond that 140 players because it's 14 teams start 10? Is it 12 times 12? Whatever it is, like, how important is that? Do I need more depth? Is it going to be the sum of the parts is equal to that stud player? Or if it's not, then we're talking about like a start 9 league, a start 8 league, which people are in. So I think knowing the settings is so critical in how you approach it. And it goes back to the startup. Can I trade up? You're in a start 9 league, you're in a 12 team league, even if it's start 10. People are, I think now, Mitch, might be a little bit more willing to trade up.
I do. So in those leagues, that's my strategy. I know nobody wants to really trade up anymore in Dynasty because Dynasty goes through these waves with how we like attack positions and everything, right? And right now we're in the wave to where every single person knows it's a better strategy to trade back and accumulate more picks, especially future picks, right? We all know this, but that means no one's really willing to trade up. But 5 years ago, there was a lot more people willing to trade up. So the deals you got were a little bit worse. As far as the person trading up, it was worse for them to trade it because they had to pay a lot more, right? But now you don't have to give up a whole bunch to move up because people are like, well, this is probably the best deal I'm going to get and I want to move back. So here we go. So I'm a lot more willing in a 12 team start 10 league to trade up and try to get 2 or 3 studs to build around than I am in a 14 team league to where it's like, yeah, I have those 3 studs, but now I'm starting Carlos Hyde's son who's in like high school right now, right?
Carlos Hyde. Oh man, I miss Carlos Hyde. He was,
I know, he was that like roster clogger guy you could just get. You're going to start him 4 or 5 weeks a season. He was fantastic. We need more Carlos Hydes.
We do. And you made a good point there. Not the Carlos Hyde point.
Oh,
before that.
I thought it was a good one.
You made a good point where, okay, 12 teams, start 10, start 9, smaller starting requirements, 120 players or less typically. I'm willing to move up.
Mm-hmm.
But now if you get a lot of people with that approach, that's where it creates the market to move back.
Yes.
And it's supply and demand. And unfortunately, like even with supply and demand, there's one person moving back and 11 people saying they want to move up, you can't like, here's the price.
Mm-hmm.
Like somebody's going to take it. No, it's not the case. Somebody might not take it, and vice versa. If you're in a 14 team start 11 and everybody's trying to move back, hey, I could probably move up for very little. So it does go into the zigging when people zag, seeing how people value things, not from a player specific standpoint, but from a roster construction standpoint, how they value each position. And, I think the biggest thing here, like, let's go to a start 2 tight end league really quick.
Okay.
All right. So we're in a 12 team league, start 11 overall, but you have to start 2 tight ends. Like, I think the mid to lower tier tight ends in those formats are so overvalued. I really do, especially if there is no scoring premium. Ben Sinnott is somebody that was talked about a ton this offseason. And I have Sinnott shares. Like I have him in our duplicate league. But you look at these guys and it's like, yeah, you have to start 2 tight ends. Yeah, maybe you get 1.5 PPR, but you get these guys with the elevated value. I mean, what's 1.5 compared to the 1 when you're getting 30 receptions over the course of the year? It's minimal. It's like, and I just think, I thought this about mid-tier quarterbacks. You go through stretches where it's like, okay, they're overvalued. Now I think to an extent they're undervalued. We talk about like let's just say a Baker Mayfield or whatever name you want to throw in there. So like it ties in perfectly, and that's what I love about this show. We always try to tie things together, and there is that connection. It's like that movie, any of those movies like
Butterfly
New
effect.
Year's Eve or Valentine's Day, where everybody has their separate storylines,
Yep.
and then at the end they all get intertwined. That's what I like to think an episode of Dynasty Theory is like.
I like it. Dude,
Valentine's Day, very romantic.
I think I've seen one of those movies once, but like I can't keep up with them, to be honest. I probably playing on my phone too much. But like talking about settings and going into this, I got in a couple 2 tight end leagues last year, and I got in one this year, and I refused to go into another one because of the reason that you said. A guy like Juwan Johnson before his injury was gonna get you a fair amount. You know, Chiggy
Probably an
in
early second price tag.
exact, and you know, and the Chiggy on the Titans is gonna get you something. They're but on your roster, they're gonna give you 40 catches, like you said, but you have to have them because it's starting 2. I think we just got to the point with those leagues. It's like, hey, let's make tight ends really valuable, but no one's going to trade for them because it's like oh, hey, I have to get a starting tight end. So, okay, maybe you'll get one team that's willing to do it. Everyone else is like, well, I don't have a starting tight end. I might as well just tank for next year. And I just think it makes the tight end market so hard. You had a league this year. I don't know if it was 12 or 14 team league, but you took Sam Laporte at the 102, right?
I did. A 12-team league, +4, -2 quarterback scoring, 2 PPR. You got to start 2 tight ends. It was kind of like I was obviously the 102, and I made a bet that, like, in my head, I made a bet that, okay, I'm at the 102. I didn't think the trade market was going to be super active, and I don't know that it was in the first few rounds. And I didn't think I was going to get a high-end tight end at the 211. I just didn't. So I made a bet, and I was happy with that pick. +6 quarterback scoring, I would have taken Mahomes. And a lot of people, I mean, when people saw that in the chat, they were like, "Oh yeah, nice move, John. Nice pick there. Oh yeah, good."
But these are the things that you have to do, right? I'm not saying that's a bad pick at all because that is his value in that league. But should Sam Laporta ever be really worth Mahomes in a dynasty league? My answer to that's no. I think the settings are a little bit wonky when you're doing that, but everyone can play in the leagues they want, right? But for me, in the leagues that I'm trying to join that I think are going to be the most active, that are going to give me the most chances to be competitive, I'm trying to stay away from those like singular kind of leagues to where like, hey, I mean, if someone came out and made a league to where it was like 0.5 point per carry points, right? That's a lot of points there, but that would be, but you could do that. Then all of a sudden, hey, running backs are more highly valued than wide receivers. And I think that could be a decent way to play, but go and try to trade for Jonathan Taylor at that point. Try to get Bijan because Bijan is going to put up more points probably than a Patrick Mahomes is. And you're not going to be able to compete. And so it makes it, those leagues are fun to start. I think like the startup draft is fun. The first year is fun, but then you're trying to take people to take over those rosters. And they're like, I don't have a tight end and I know I can't trade for a tight end. So how am I ever going to rebuild that team? Because the people in the league already know they're not trading their tight ends. They know the value of them. And how am I ever going to rebuild a roster to compete? So I just think that's something to keep in mind, that if you are making leagues with these unique settings to make certain positions more valuable, you could go overboard and make it really, really hard for the rest of the league to even do anything.
Or even if it's, let's say it's this 12 teams start 13 or 14, where
yes,
you have to start 13 or 13. You have to start 3
wide receivers.
You have to start 3 running backs. You have to start 4 wide receivers. It's still a 12-team league, but you do see fewer people make a move. Yes. But I think there are trades that get done then out of necessity because, I need a wide receiver. I need a running back. But like, if it's very hard to trade with the general, 11 other managers, you have to find that specific trade partner. And as we say, if they're away from the keyboard, it gets very difficult and very frustrating. And, oftentimes it can be a struggle. You talk about the Sam Laporta situation. For me, I go into the league settings. I go into dynastydaddy.com, like we've talked about, proud partner. Great work that Jeremy's doing over there. Talk about it every single episode. But I go in, I look at my baseline warp. I look at the warp in that league. Tight end 1, 2, 3, 4, like significantly elevated. Not
Mhm.
putting a name to it, but the tight end 1 through 4, just like through the roof. So for me, it felt like the right move.
Yeah.
And then you see these mid-tier tight ends going like 5th, 6th, 7th round, and you look at their warp and you're like, this doesn't make sense from a roster construction standpoint. So I love the overall idea of digging into that and how it impacts your league. And if things are elevated, if the price goes above where it should be, you go the other way. I think that's a very simple way to look at it. If the price is below where it should be, you go the other way. And that goes for specific positions. That goes for startup picks. If the price to move up is too low, move up. If the price to move back is too low, move back. Like, I think it can be very simple. One thing I wanted to ask you, neither you or I have really joined that many startups this off season, but we've done a few. I've done a few with, I don't want to say random people, but more random than our Discord. And then we see people posting in our Discord, hey, I'm going to start up. It's not with any of you clowns. So it's a completely different market. Something I have seen is if you want to get your top tier quarterback in the first, great. But if you have like the 101 or 102, I think I'm waiting on my quarterback too.
Oh, definitely.
Because I have seen builds where people have posted like through 4 rounds, they have, let's say, Josh Allen, or let's say Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, Brock Purdy, Dak Prescott. And it's like, I know that's the value. I post the questions in the Discord, and that's how everybody's saying. But that then takes me to hold off on your quarterback too, because you're probably going to get a Dak or a Goff in the 4th, 5th, 6th round. Maybe not the 6th, but you could get a Dak in the 4th round. I think it's then the best approach to get the positional advantage elsewhere, as opposed to loading up on quarterback, because we know, Mitch, we've taken part in startups as co-managers where we hoarded quarterbacks, and the league was actively saying in the chat, don't trade with these guys.
Yeah.
They're a-holes.
Exactly. That's what happens. And you have to understand this is what happens in Dynasty, right? To where you have to be able to see the market pretty quickly. That's a huge thing to being very, I don't know, profitable is the right word. To be a very good Dynasty manager, you have to be able to look at a league and very quickly go like, hey, if no one else is valuing quarterbacks and you just keep taking all the quarterbacks, those same managers are never going to value quarterbacks. They've already said, hey, I don't care, whatever. You might have 1 or 2 that comes in like, hey, are you willing to trade Jared Goff and I'll give you, I mean, we got in a conversation in a league earlier about a Geno Smith for some, I don't even remember what it was, but it wasn't close to Geno Smith's value. The guy was like, well, he's a 34-year-old quarterback. He isn't worth anything. And it's like, well, I mean, if we're coming to a trade discussion with you having that view, I have the view of, hey, it's a starting quarterback in a super flex league. Our values are never going to match. And if you are in a league with a lot of managers like that, you're just not going to be able to trade quarterbacks. And so I love John's idea there to where if you see quarterbacks sliding down the board, let them slide, because you're going to have to compete in that league as well. If everyone is slamming positional value and you end up having 5 starting quarterbacks, you're still not competing in that league, because then your starting lineup isn't going to be as good as theirs. And
now, if you're looking to rebuild from the start, if you're looking to tank, that's the only situation.
Agreed.
I think if quarterback is dropping, hold all that value in your quarterback room, because then you're not worrying about the running backs that, they might be productive, but are they going to lose value? The answer is yes. Or a wide receiver that maybe they're getting a little bit older, but also you're ensuring, like, especially with this class coming up, if you're in a 24 startup and you're holding value in your quarterback room, we know the quarterbacks, that's not the strength of the class. So if I'm getting 101, 102, We can look at one of the high-end wide receivers. We can look at one of these top-tier running backs that very well could start to shift the balance back to not the running back landscape we saw from like 2018, but getting a little bit more in the middle, a nice middle ground. So I think this is the year, if you're tanking from the start, hold value in your quarterback room.
I think you're definitely right, but it's in both ways. So this coming 2025 draft, like you said, isn't quarterback heavy. But let's say you had two starting quarterbacks. I had a couple leagues like this, and I had the 101 in this year's draft with Caleb Williams there. All of a sudden, I'm able to move off that pick and get a whole bunch of additional capital because I don't need to have Caleb Williams on my team. Like if you're not dead set, hey, this is the generational, how everyone felt when Trevor Lawrence was coming in the league, all those other things. You're like, hey, I'm willing to move off this guy for a little bit more value. Then all of a sudden you have that much more ammunition further in the draft or further on your team that you can just get. Maybe you picked up a whole bunch of vets. Now all of a sudden you have a viable starting roster because you were able to move off of that 101. So I definitely think you're right. If you could hold value in your QB room when you're tanking, you have that in draft picks. Everything else will play itself out.
Yeah. This episode, like I always say, could be so much longer. There's so much more we could get into. If you enjoy this type of content, the overall overarching strategy discussions, subscribe, like, comment, let us know what you want to see more of, what you want to see less of. Obviously we keep these episodes a little bit different than our weekly episode. This is very more theory based. And I think it's a good way to divide it up, where we have more player discussions on the weekly episode, but more theory and strategy based on these types of episodes. And I think the big takeaway is, Mitch, knowing your league, if at all possible, the league settings certainly coming into play, knowing the positional advantages, where they are. Is the value getting too high, too low compared to that? Is it a good idea to move up or trade back? Is the price right from a market perspective to go against the grain? Do you zig when people zag? And I think that's critical. Always having that counter in your back pocket, where if everyone's going this way and the price makes sense, go that way. So I hope everybody enjoyed this. Like I said, we could talk about the startup strategy so much more. We appreciate you listening. Have a great day.